Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. Look at this beautiful graph, colorful graph, but scary at the same time as well. Is it compulsory to know this graph if you are thinking to solve question number 4 of microeconomics of the guest paper? Then yes, you must know this graph, and this graph is from the consumer behavior and the derivation of demand curve. So what is question number 4 of microeconomics? You can see this question on the screen right now, and this is for A2 microeconomics guest paper for June 2024 exam series. So just read this question and then I'll explain you what should be the scheme to answer this question. So first of all, keep in mind the three assessment objectives: assessment objective 1, 2 and assessment objective 3. Assessment objective 1 is knowledge, assessment objective 2 is analysis, assessment objective 3 is evaluation. Assessment objective 1 and 2 collectively carry 14 marks and assessment objective 2 carries 6 marks. So this is how you can get full 20 out of 20 marks if you consider all the requirements of this question. And what should you write in the knowledge part? In the knowledge part, keep in mind you have like the knowledge part of indifference curve. So you will have to define what indifference curve is, and then you have to make the graph, basic graph of indifference curve. So indifference curve is a graph that shows different combinations of two products that provide the same level of satisfaction. For example, we have two goods, X good and Y good, and IC curve or indifference curve looks like this. This indifference curve shows that consumer will get 100 units of satisfaction along all the combinations of this same same IC curve. So if consumer purchases at combination A or combination B, both combinations will give him the same level of satisfaction. And then you have to explain the basic assumptions of indifference curve as well. And then you have to draw a consumer equilibrium, and consumer equilibrium is a point where budget line is tangent to the indifference curve. Okay, so indifference curve and budget line is tangent to indifference curve at combination E, at point E, where consumer purchases X1 quantity of X good and Y1 quantity of Y good. So on Y axis we have Y good and on X axis we have X good. And then you have to define like what normal good is, what inferior good is, and what given good is. So normal goods are the good quality products that are positively linked with the income and negatively related to the price level. If income increases, consumers purchase greater quantity of normal goods. So if income increases, demand will rise. And similarly, if price falls, quantity demand will rise. So this is the relationship between income and demand as well as price and quantity demand in case of normal goods. And in case of inferior goods, if income increases, consumers generally purchase less of these goods, but if price falls, consumer will increase quantity demand of inferior goods but with a smaller percentage. Okay, so in case of like normal good, fall in income increases quantity demand, fall in price increases quantity demand, and same is the case with inferior good, fall in price increases quantity demand. However, the impact in case of inferior good on demand will be lesser than the impact in case of normal goods. So a little fall in price leads to relatively greater increase in quantity demand in case of normal good, and fall in price increases quantity demand of inferior goods a little bit. So the demand curve in case of inferior good is relatively steep, and demand curve in case of normal good is relatively flat, right, like this. This is steep and this is flat. And given goods are the goods that are like negatively related to the income. If income increases, demand will fall substantially, and if price falls, quantity demand will also decrease. Because given goods are the worst quality products and consumers will purchase less of them whenever there is fall in price. Fall in price actually increases purchasing power of the consumers, and when purchasing power is high, no one will be willing to purchase like given goods. So demand for given goods will fall because of low price and higher purchasing power of the consumers. So this is the basic knowledge of all the terms that are given here, and now you have to analyze the graph, analyze the situation or question. In analysis part, you have to answer the question, right? Right now we were not answering the question, we were just defining what the basic terms are here, although definitions and basic description of these terms carry 7 marks, 6 to 7 marks. However, they are not the exact answer to the question. For answering the question, we have to analyze the given situation. If you give this basic knowledge, maximum you can get 7 marks, but if you analyze them by making graphs and by connecting these variables and showing relationship between them, then you can get 14 marks out of 14 for assessment objective 1 and 2. And in case of evaluation, you have to write against whatever you have analyzed in assessment objective 2. Okay, so now we are going to like make the graph for assessment objective 2, where we will say that demand curve is negatively sloped in case of normal and inferior goods, right? So I'm going to make the graph once again, but I'll make this graph that you can see on the screen right now. In case of normal good, this is the demand curve for normal good, that is relatively flatter, right? And this is the demand curve for inferior goods, which is relatively steeper but negatively sloped. And this is the demand curve for given goods, that is positively sloped, right? Because it is going upward like this, like a supply curve. So whenever graph is positively sloped, it shows positive link between price and quantity demand. When it is negatively sloped, it shows negative relationship or inverse relationship between price and quantity demand. And if it is steeper, it shows a little change in quantity demand due to change in price, and if it is flatter, then it shows greater change in quantity demand due to change in income, due to change in price. But definitely making this graph is a little complicated, so I'm making this graph once again for you. So I'm assuming one thing, that there is fall in price effect, right? Fall in price effect, and x good is taken as normal. The same x good is considered as inferior, and same x good is assumed to be a given good. So I'll consider x good for all these 3 cases, and I'll make graph for each one of them. For example, price falls from $10 to, let's say, $5. Okay, so if demand curve is always negatively sloped or not, we can prove it with the graph. So we have to make 2 graphs, connecting graphs. Okay, so the lower graph basically shows a relationship between quantity demand and price. The graph that you already know, that in AS you have learned this concept. Whenever we have to draw demand curve, we need quantity demand on x and we need price on y axis. As I have already assumed that price falls from $10 to $5, so I can plot $10 price here. So this is $10 price, and now it falls to $5, so I have decreased it to $5. Okay, and in the upper graph I will plot x good on x. X good can be any type of good, like maybe it's banana or apples, right, and other good is y good. So y good is a neutral good, and we will not consider what impact is coming on that good, but we will consider the impact on x good. And x good is taken as normal good. Another condition we will use for now, x good is inferior good, and then we will consider it as given good as well. So I am showing all these three goods on x axis. So first of all, draw an initial budget line. This is budget line AB, and draw an initial IC curve. I am making indifference curve partially. I am not completing it right now, because when I'll have to like make substitution effect, then I'll extend this same graph. So initially I'm taking combination E as an initial equilibrium point, and if we connect this point with the lower graph, then I will get quantity, let's say Q1, and we assume that initially price was $10, right? So this perpendicular intersects $10 price at combination A, right, at point A. So I have labeled it A. And now what will be the change in the upper graph if there is fall in price of X? If price of X falls, then budget line will shift like this. Pivotal shift will come in this graph basically. So the new budget line will be IC, because you must know that whenever there is change in price of one product, it will cause a pivotal shift, mean there will be no change on y axis, there is only change on x axis, because price of X is changing. Okay, so another thing that we have to incorporate in this graph is we have to draw a substitution effect as well. Substitution, in case of substitution effect, two lines cross each other. For example, initial budget line is this, let's say it's AB, and now if there is fall in price of X, then budget line will shift like this, right? There will be increase in purchasing power of X good to C, decrease in purchasing power of Y good to D. So lines cross each other. So we have already incorporated price effect in the upper graph, and now what we have to do is we have to incorporate the substitution effect as well. So if there is fall in price of X, then consumer think that their purchasing power for Y has decreased, but at the same time purchasing power for X has increased. X has increased. So you can make the graph like this, and this graph will be, the orange line will be the parallel line to the blue line. Okay, so keep in mind, for showing substitution effect, what we do is we make two equilibrium points, one at the initial PPC at the initial budget line, and the other on the subsequent budget line. So let's say it was E, and now this was E, and now it moved to E1. So if we draw perpendicular, then we will get substitution effect, and it means new substitution effect will be, combination will be at E1 here on this line. And one more important thing that you must know is, when there is X good is a normal good, then the new equilibrium at the price effect line, that is blue line, will be to the right hand side of both of these equilibriums, E and E1, right? So new equilibrium will take place at E2 for price effect in case of normal good. So this equilibrium will take place for normal good. And if X good is an inferior good, then the new equilibrium will be between E and E1, somewhere at this point, let's say E3. So this is for inferior good. And keep in mind, if X good is a given good, then the new equilibrium will be to the left hand side of both equilibrium E and E1. So the new equilibrium in case of given good will take place at E4. So this is for given good. Once you have identified all of these things, new equilibriums, then it is really simple to make demand curve for them. In case of normal goods, so the initial point for all of these inferior, normal and given good is shown with this combination A. And for normal good, if we draw a perpendicular from E2 to the lower graph, then quantity will be Q2 for normal goods. Since we assume that price of normal good has decreased from $10 to $5, so this perpendicular intersects $5 price at combination B, right? So if we join point A and B, we get a demand curve, negatively sloped demand curve, that is for normal good. Now moving to the inferior good, as I have already mentioned that this will be the equilibrium for inferior goods. So I will have to draw the perpendicular from E3 to the lower graph, that is point Q3, and the new price is $5 because it has decreased from $10 to $5. So for inferior good, the new combination will be point C. And now if we join point A and C, then we will get another demand curve which is also negatively sloped, but it is a little steeper. So this is for inferior good. So both demand curves for normal and inferior goods are negatively sloped, but inferior good is relatively steeper than the normal good. And now the last thing that we have to incorporate in this graph is given good case. So for given good, we have equilibrium at this point, and if we draw perpendicular, if examiner asks question for normal and inferior goods, then your graph will end here, that I have already made. But if examiner asks question about normal good, inferior good and given good, all three types of goods, then you will have to make given good graph as well. Sometimes examiner may also ask question about normal and given only, or inferior and given, normal and inferior. So you will have to change this graph accordingly. Okay, so for given goods, if we draw this perpendicular, then the new quantity is Q4, and the new price, as we have assumed that it is $5 and it has decreased from 10 to 5. So the new combination will be combination D. And now if we join combination A and D, then we will get a positively sloped demand curve, and it happens in case of given good. So this is case of given good. Okay, so analysis and evaluation both are given in this graph. Analysis will be whenever there is fall in price, quantity demand increases in case of normal and inferior goods, so demand curve will be negatively sloped. The demand in case of normal good is relatively flatter like this. This is normal good for demand curve for normal good, that is relatively flatter, and this is the demand curve for inferior good, which is negatively sloped but relatively steeper. However, as an evaluation part, you will say that in case of given goods, demand curve is positively sloped, showing positive link between price and quantity demand. So this is price and this is quantity demand. When demand curve the graph is like this is known as positive relationship, and when graph is like this, it is negative relationship. So in case of normal and inferior good, graph looks negatively sloped, and in case of given good, it is positively sloped. And you will have to explain all the things that are showing in this graph, or everything that I was speaking is the part of explanation of this graph. You have to write everything I was speaking, and at the end you have to conclude, and in conclusion you will just try to justify that whenever there is fall in price, quantity demand increases in case of normal and inferior goods. So the demand curve will be negatively sloped in both the cases. However, the demand curve will be relatively steeper in case of inferior good and flatter in case of normal good. On the other hand, the demand curve in case of given goods is positively sloped, which is an exceptional case. Generally, when price falls, people purchase more, but in this case, when price falls, people purchase less. As I told you earlier that when price is low, it increases purchasing power of the consumers, and when people have more purchasing power, they purchase less of the given goods, right? Given goods are the worst quality products, so they purchase them when their purchasing power is very low. Okay, so I believe you got this idea. This was really tricky and conceptual stuff. So if you are interested to solve this question, then you must practice this graph as well. So see you with the next video, and I have generated a WhatsApp group for AS and A2 students, and if you are interested to join that, then you can go to the description and find a link of WhatsApp group there, and just click that link, you will automatically join it. So I have recently created that, so there are very few, like just a few members right now, but if you wish, you can join it immediately. So see you in the next video. Allah Hafiz.